All right, folks, here we are yet again for another great podcast. This is the 5 Points with the Chief. You know, they say it's not the destination, but the journey. So today we're going to talk about the strategic plan, both the old and the new, and how you can get involved in being a part of making this organization even better than it already is.
Our employees talk about, how do I get my voice heard? How do I affect change within such a large organization? Well, the strategic plan is one of the ways to affect change.
Stay here with me. We'll be right back with the 5 Points with the Chief. Let's get cooking. All right, ladies and gentlemen, here it is. This is the podcast that talks about the journey that this department is taking. Again, I am Monty Manson. I'm your host, and I'm here with the director of CAL FIRE, the director and fire chief, Mr. Joe Tyler. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon, Monty.
All right. Good to see you again. So before we get into this conversation about the journey towards this evolution of the department, want to start off a little bit lighter, and let's get into something that many of you who are out there in the department have been around for a number of years. You will recognize those three letters, CDF. Chief Tyler, what does the old CDF mean to you?
You know, when I think of CDF or the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, it really is reflecting back on what many will call old forestry. And old forestry really, when I look back at the beginning of my career working in the Shasta Trinity unit at the Bernie Forest Fire Station, was an opportunity of green and khaki. It was having resilient fire captains and supervisors. Not that we don't have those today. I'm just reflecting back on what I remember.
Yeah.
I remember small opportunities to hike to lightning fires across the eastern Shasta County area. I remember opportunities in which funding was not readily available or not as available as it is today to be able to do things we do today as well. And I go to memorial services and things of those natures today, and I see my old fire captains, and I recognize that over the years that I've lost connections with those old fire captains, but they're equally important and inspiring and mentoring to me today as they were back then.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think about us, we're the same generation, those Gen Xers, and we came up in the department about the same time, and thinking about the way things were back then, even for me as an administrative person here in Sacramento, and, being in the old resources building that was built way back in the 60s. And again, similar to you, thinking about those old managers and supervisors and folks who really shaped who I am even as an individual. And so it's just kind of a lesson to everybody is we always have to remember where we came from to figure out how we're going to be moving forward. And that's a great lead in to some of our conversations today about the strategic plan.
Absolutely.
Right?
I agree.
Yeah. So it's really good. So for those of you out there, think about those old CDF days and those folks that really mentored you and really shaped who you are as employees of this great organization. We're really proud of all of the things that have happened throughout the department's history, getting us here today to be able to shape the CAL FIRE of tomorrow. So we're really excited about that.
I agree. And even if you are not part of what we'll refer to as the old CDF, you were still shaped and mentored by somebody or a variety of managers, supervisors, or life experiences. So if you didn't previously work for CDF and you're in this department as CAL FIRE today, well, think about what shaped you then to make you who you are today. And ultimately, like our last episode, made you realize what is your why.
There it is. That's it. Oh, so you made the connection back to the
old.
There he goes. See, we got him. We're getting good, y'all. We're getting good. All right, Chief. So let's get into this conversation about how do we move the department forward. Corporations all around the world do things like futuring and planning, and there's a process to it all. And this department goes through that process just like any other organization does. And so we're going to be talking about the strategic plan and how does that work and what have we done before and what are we doing now to prepare the department for what's coming for the future. And so for you, Chief Tyler, one of the first questions that I wanted to ask you really is, why does a strategic plan even matter? What's the point of doing a strategic plan?
Well, I appreciate that. And as many know or don't know, our current strategic plan can be found on our intranet page, and it can be found, quite honestly, by simply Googling the CAL FIRE strategic plan. It comes right up. But important for me is, as I support all the people out there, all of our employees to make this department what it is I actually keep a hard copy of our 2019 strategic plan. So as a kickoff, the January 2019 strategic plan is a strategic plan that we're working on now. And this really is what we publish as a blueprint for success, a path forward, something that defines our mission, our vision, our values, and what our goals and objectives are specifically in 2019 to 2023. We recognize that things change over time. When we did the 2019 strategic plan, we had no idea that just a year later, we would be turned sideways through the COVID pandemic.
Right.
So strategic plans are always subject to change, but it really is our guiding document to move forward.
Absolutely. You bring up a really good point with the pandemic that hit at that time. I was around when then Director Pimlott had actually initiated that process, and then it transitioned over to Director Porter, former Director Porter, to implement. And, like you said, none of us at the time who were involved in that project had any idea what was going to be happening in March of 2020 when everything kind of went kaput. And so, yes, sometimes the best laid plans kind of end up, changing. And that's okay because we're an adaptable organization and we made things work and we're still doing that. It's important to know, though, like you said, Chief, that there has to be a plan of some sort that really just outlines for everyone who we are. What is our mission? What's our purpose? And that's what really this whole strategic plan effort and project is all about. So we're happy to be engaged in this, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the details of the plan and kind of what we're looking forward to, some of the folks who were involved and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. And as you said, every organization has a strategic plan. It has a mission, vision of moving their organization, their agency forward. It's important to note, one of the ways that we use the strategic plan largely has to do with creating budget change proposals. It is a path forward of how we work with the administration, supported by the administration, working with the legislature in both the Assembly and the Senate, working with the Department of Finance on what our future is going to look like to meet the needs. So we base all of our budget change proposals on the goals and objectives set forth in this strategic plan.
That's right. And I think for folks out there who may not be aware, it's important to know, kind of to your point, is that a lot of those folks, whether it's the legislature, Department of Finance and whatnot, they will question us about, how did you come up with this proposal? Why? What's the why in this proposal? And a lot of times we will refer to our strategic plan. Now, that's not the only thing that we refer to, but as you said, Chief, it is very, very vital for us to have a plan in order to endeavor in the types of resources and funding and things that we look for on an annual basis. Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree. And it's equally important of how we just started this conversation, that this document is publicly available. So all those governmental organizations and all these private organizations also have access to this strategic plan to understand what our mission, vision, values, goals, and objectives really are. Now, it's also important to not confuse the 2019 CAL FIRE strategic plan with the 2018 California fire plan.
Yes, good point.
Which a lot of times gets confused with why are you not following the 2018 California fire plan that is approved and published through the Board of Forestry? Well, absolutely, we are following the direction of the Board of Forestry and the administration in the 2018 fire plan. But again, the strategic plan really is about meeting our goals and objectives.
Beautiful. Perfectly said, Chief. And I appreciate that point because I even, back in the day, I had that thought for a moment too, like, wait a minute, I see these two different plans. What's the difference? And so you kind of just explained that. So I think that's great for a lot of the folks to hear out there who may also have had some of those thoughts. So great. All right, Chief. So now that we've kind of opened up our conversation about, what the plan is and why you're supposed to do one, maybe we should talk about in that whole vein of recognizing where we've come from in order to build upon that and get to where we're going. Maybe we should talk a little bit about what is the 2019 strategic plan all about? How did it come about? And some of the successes and maybe some of the challenges that we experienced through that. But let's talk about that plan a little bit. What's your sense of overall the 2019 strategic plan and how we built it and how we've executed some of the pieces in that plan?
Well, you think about the implementation of the 2019 strategic plan and the goals and objectives that were in there. Some of the goals and objectives were very measurable, and we can say that we succeeded. Some of them are a little bit more broad and will always be ongoing. When you look at the 2019 strategic plan and you flip back to the back of the plan, it talks about the things that we as a department wanted to achieve by 2023. Some of those we certainly achieved. Some of those we're still working on based on things that occurred in these last 5 years, such as the pandemic that we talked about earlier, some of the fire activity that we had in 2020 and 21 that really drove a need to focus more on fire prevention and fuels reduction at the same time as continuing our emergency response. So when you look in the back of the 2019 strategic plan, you'll see a lot of items. And then if you start thinking about it, items that we accomplished, that really we go back to the beginning. We embrace our past. We know sometimes change is hard, but we continue to move forward with new and innovative ideas.
Right.
Some of those examples, people know that I'm intimately familiar with aviation, right? But being able to reopen the Fresno Air Attack Base, being able to acquire 16 S-70I Firehawk helicopters, or move to be able to acquire 7 C-130s. At the same time, some important achievements have occurred just in these last couple of years that were delayed by the pandemic, and those include the hiring of the necessary administrative staff that we had unfortunately left behind for so many years, and we acquired that through direct mission support. 192 additional administrative positions to be placed across the entire state. And while a firefighter might say, well, that doesn't affect me, well, most certainly think about your engineers and your fire captains who are sitting in their offices doing a load of administrative work. Well, now we're able to increase the administrative support across the department to achieve some of that workload and to absorb some of that workload. At the same time, the relief budget change proposal added 455 additional positions. That's on top of the 172 that we actually got during the pandemic to be able to move forward. And this is a guide moving forward as the Joint Labor Management Committee continues to have discussions about reduced work weeks for firefighters. But it's not just bargaining unit 8, it's all the other bargaining units as well. to be able to utilize our goals and objectives that are within our strategic plan to say, how can we be more efficient? How can we be more productive? Building those budget change proposals again to be able to ease some of the workload or some of the deficiencies we have today.
Yeah, absolutely. When I think of the 2019 strategic plan and the 4 primary goals in there, one of the things that I think about, and you tell me what you think about this, Chief, is increasing operational efficiency, and there's those 4, but the one that always stands out to me really has to do with creating a motivated workforce, creating and enhancing a motivated workforce, one workforce that can do all the things that everyone expects this department to do. We can't do it without the people. From your perspective, of the 4 goals from 2019, which one really stands out to you and why?
Well, I think you just said it. On day 1 of accepting this position as the director, I talked about the need to care about and move forward the health and wellness of our employees. And I truly believe to have the most motivated and productive workforce, you have to take care of your people. You have to support the people who make this organization what it is. So you hit it. That's the most important of the 4 for me.
Okay, well, let's talk about the next iteration of the department's strategic plan set to come out in July of 2024. We've been doing some work on it already. Folks across the department have been engaged in this process. It's not something where, 1 or 2 folks sit down and just write out a Word document, and next thing you know, it's the strategic plan. It takes some time. It takes some effort. And I really am interested in making sure that folks know your philosophy behind the process for creating the strategic plan for 2024. It's different from what we did back in 2019. And I think the folks really need to hear where you're coming from. And it really kind of touches back on this idea of how important the people are in an organization in order to make it function. And so, Chief, if you wouldn't mind talking about that process for creating the 2024 strategic plan, give the folks a little flavor for what that's looking like and kind of how it's shaping up as we move forward.
Yeah, thank you for that. So often, and not just strategic plan, but everything we do, our employees talk about, how do I get my voice heard? How do I help affect change within such a large organization, 12,000.1 employees? How do I affect change within such a large organization? Well, the strategic plan is one of the ways to affect change. Preparing issue papers to come up through our defined processes are another way to affect change. When I look back at the 2019 strategic plan that went back to 2023, and it says by 2023, we're going to accomplish what we're going to accomplish. And then we're going to have a small gap going into 2024. There were a lot of good reasons for that. One could argue that this strategic plan is my vision for the 12,000 employees of this department. But it's important to me to ensure that everybody has a voice in this process, so their voice can be heard. At the end of the day, I will approve the mission, the vision, and the values of our department. But I want to hear from those on the ground, those who are working in the field, whether it be the Office of the State Fire Marshal, technical services, business services, management services, whether it be pipeline safety or our firefighters that are on the ground. I want to hear from them. That is what is so important to make our 2024 strategic plan what it's going to be.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And you have elicited some very important help in making the 2024 strategic plan come to fruition. That is through the work of Phyllis Banducci, who was formerly an assistant deputy director here for CAL FIRE, is now a retired annuitant, but she's come back to do some work for us and has been doing some tremendous work so far. So do you mind maybe just talking about what her role is in this process and how that piece is coming along? Absolutely.
So to make sure that we hit our mark, and hitting our mark means going through the Office of State Publishing. It means getting approvals for our strategic plan through various levels of government. It is so important to have a good facilitator. Now, Phyllis Banducci, as you said, was the Assistant Deputy Director of Cooperative Fire Protection. I both worked for her, and I was her partner at one time. She has an analytical, organized mindset to be able to move this forward, and a personality that is willing to come to me and keep me on track to make sure that I meet my deadlines.
Right. Not too many folks that can do that. So that's good to know.
So of sorts, she's our facilitator.
Yeah.
She is the one who is behind the scenes, making sure that we're driving forward, that we're meeting our expectations, and that by July 1st, 2024, we'll have a new strategic plan.
Absolutely. Shouts out to Phyllis Banducci. You're doing great work. We really appreciate everything you're doing. One of the other things that maybe we could talk about a little bit is who are some of the other groups so far that you're aware of that we've engaged with? I've obviously been a part of some of those conversations, but I know it's gone well beyond what's been happening in Sacramento. Can you give us a little bit of flavor of who else are we touching up to this point, and maybe a little bit of how we're going to get out to those masses that you're talking about?
Absolutely. So this project started in January 2023, 18 months start to finish. And really it started with a discussion at our executive team. That built into a steering committee that includes myself on making sure that we're meeting our timeframes and our goals and objectives in this organizing and planning process. From there, using the executive team and the department leadership team, we started reaching out to internal and external stakeholders to get their feedback and their discussion on ways in which we can move forward, whether that is having discussions with labor organizations, with our contract county partners at one of our meetings, across the California Fire Service at one of our recent fire scope meetings that occurred in El Dorado Hills.
Yeah.
But at the same time, using things like SurveyMonkey and other survey type products that have really allowed us to go out to the public at large and ask the public, our federal cooperators, our tribal partners, on what they feel their relationship is with CAL FIRE and ways in which we can do better.
Yeah, that's it. And I think that those are all very important for folks to know, that this isn't just an internal high level, conversation. Yes, it has some elements of that, but we really want to make sure that everybody has a piece of this, because like you said, those 12,000.1 employees all have a stakehold in how this department moves forward. And so, yeah, that's definitely important. So we appreciate that. So, Chief, one of the things that we have touched on a little bit, but maybe we can dive into a little bit more, has to do with, and I think the examples are both the 2019 strategic plan as well as what we're going to be doing for 2024, is that they are multiple year plans. The 2019 plan was implemented in 2019. It will expire at the end of this year. And then for 2024 in July, it's going to have that 5-year kind of implementation life cycle. And so why do we do multiple year plans? Why not just do a plan every single year? Or why do one for 10 years? How did we get to this 5-year thing? And what's the significance of a multiple year plan?
Yeah, absolutely. So I need to hit on something that the listeners might catch as well and think about something. We have a plan that is supposed to get us through 2023. And then we have a new plan that we're talking about that will be printed and published by July of 2024. So what happens in the 6-month gap?
Yes, true.
Well, we're going to use the current strategic plan to be able to move forward through that 6-month gap.
Gotcha.
Why did I change it? I changed it really from a calendar year to a fiscal year. And why did we change it to a fiscal year? Because so often our strategic plan aligns with budget change proposals.
Yeah.
And it's important to make sure that our goals and objectives that are in the current strategic plan and that time frame in which we're going to transition to a new strategic plan, that those goals and objectives still align for our stakeholders and our partners who really are going to be looking to this document as well. Now, you've got to recognize that we're a large organization that many times takes multiple years to be able to affect change related to a specific program area. And so a 5-year strategic plan will allow us to do that. But equally important is think about how long we're investing in creating this new 5-year strategic plan, 18 months.
Right.
There is no probable way that we would be able to do a new strategic plan year in and year out.
Right.
But we make sure that we leave enough flexibility in the plan that when we have large fires like we had in 20 and 21, or even a pandemic, there is flexibility in this plan to be able to move to meet our goals and objectives.
Yeah, you nailed it, and it's very important for all of our listeners to just keep in mind, working for state government, because each and every one of us, that's what we are. We are state employees in state government. Sometimes it just takes time to get some things done. There are a lot of approvals. There are a lot of processes and cycles that we have to work through, as you mentioned, budget change proposals. And that's how we get our people. That's how we get our funding to do things a lot of times. That's outside of the grants process and all that. But, those important processes don't happen overnight. And so, to your point, Chief, it's important to kind of give us some space to affect the kind of change that we, quite frankly, were successfully able to do with the 2019 strategic plan. I mean, we did some big things, man, like kind of what you talked about. And so to give us that space again for another 5 years to be able to do that, I think is going to be, great. I'm gonna throw a little bit of a curveball, but I you got this one. Because you mentioned the BCP process, and I think that's important for folks out there to know. But there may be some individuals who aren't familiar with that. But I think the most important piece to that for our general listeners out there is, how can they be a part of affecting change in a BCP process? Is it a issue paper? Is it a conversation with their captain? Is it, what can they do to be heard, to be a part of that process, to really put their stamp on what it is that we're doing to move forward in this organization?
So it is all of the above. It is when you have a good idea, making sure that idea is heard. Talk to your supervisors and your managers about bringing ideas forward. And as you progress through the department, and as you learn and educate every day something new, you will learn and educate yourself on an issue paper format, as you just said, giving an opportunity to put down your thoughts and ideas and progress those forward through the organization to see some real change occur. It is about joining committees and work groups when those opportunities come, to be able to represent your geographic or functional areas, to be able to affect change there as well.
Yeah.
Quite honestly, as the director of this department, I could come up through my career and say, if I was ever the director, I would be able to immediately affect change. It's not that simple. Everybody has a boss, and everybody has thoughts, and all of those thoughts are valued.
Yeah, 100%. It's funny you say that last part, because I think back to, when I was younger in my career here, and I'm sure many of us can identify with the idea of, being younger and thinking, man, if I were there, I would just do this. How come they don't just do X? What's taking them so long? That kind of thing. And then you get into these positions and you start thinking, oh, now I get it.
Yeah, for sure. Every day.
Every day. Even now, I think, even at the level I'm at now, sometimes I think, well, Yeah, we could just do that, but you can't just do that. Like you said, everyone has a boss. You have a boss. Your boss's boss has a boss. The governor has some responsibilities to a number of different people, and so it isn't always that simple. And I think what's also important is for an organization like ours, who, quite frankly, is in the limelight. We are enjoying a great, response from the public. We're happy. We're so proud of what everybody does, and everybody's proud of us. But even with that, it takes time to get things done, and so we just have to keep that in mind as we move forward and embark on what we're doing with the strategic plan.
And so that is, to tie it back in, that is why we have a strategic plan to help guide us.
To help guide us. There it is. Thanks, Chief. So, Chief, after talking through all of the kind of the components of the 2024 strategic plan and how it's coming along, you mentioned a little bit ago in one of the previous questions the idea of this strategic plan working group. And so I wanted you to tell the folks a little bit about that strategic plan working group. How did it come about? Why is it so important? And what can we expect to see from them as we look forward to this July 2024 implementation?
Absolutely. So it's much like this podcast we're doing today, right? Is we're so busy in our day-to-day activities and moving the department forward that sometimes we don't think about ways in which we can communicate better, or even capture people's thoughts and concerns better. So where this podcast came from, a question and answer phase of what was leadership level 1, and thank you for that suggestion to bring us where we are today. It's really the same thing about the strategic plan working group. It was a discussion in the northern region between the unit chiefs there, and then some further discussion with the unit chiefs in the south. That said, really, if you're trying to get to the core of the department, you can't leave it at the executive team, department leadership team, or even program managers and supervisors, including the unit chiefs and staff chiefs. So a suggestion was made to expand the working group. And so that's exactly what we did. Yeah. We expanded the working group to include both uniformed and non-uniformed personnel, from the ranks of firefighter up through a manager, to really think about and look at where the 2019 strategic plan took us and where our 2024 strategic plan will take us into the future. Now, we've had a lot of discussion about the mission, and I'll tell you right now, at the end of the day, we've chosen not to change our mission statement.
Right. Yeah.
Our vision statement is going to change. And our values are going to change a little bit as well after the discussion and the surveys and the partnerships of having those discussions already. So it's really about changing what our values are as well. Now, they'll still be in alignment with what our current values are, but they're going to change a little bit into the future. And so this work group talking about what our future values will be, and then as we talk about behavioralizing what our values are, what does each value mean to you? Well, that's where we're going to really use this cross-section of administrative and fire suppression, fire prevention personnel to bring that together to make sure that the whole department can align with our values. Because if our employees can't align with our mission, vision, and values, then again, it's going to go back to we're not going to have an engaged and motivated workforce.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, to your point, Chief, is really that call to action for everyone in the organization to become involved. It does not matter which of the 13 of 21 bargaining units you affiliate with. We want to hear your voice. You want to hear their voice as we build this plan out. So there are opportunities occurring right now out there. As you mentioned, this working group consists of folks all the way up and down the chain of command, uniformed and administrative support staff. All kinds of folks are involved in this process, and so there really is opportunity for everyone. And that's why I think it's important to just come forward and identify yourself and say, hey, here are some ideas that I've thought and in my career as I've worked here. Here's what I want to see. Can I be a part of this? How do I do that? And that's what we want. We want people to be a part of that process, and we want you to bring your ideas forward. I think I've heard you even say before, thousands of folks are better than one folk. You didn't say it like that, but that's Monty's words. But anyway, but great minds are out there. That's my point.
Yeah.
Waiting to have us pull these ideas from them, and I think we're going to end up with a really good product as a result.
I think we are as well.
Yeah.
One of the greatest benefits that I've seen in recent years is being able to provide departmental email addresses to every employee in this department. So when we send out an executive email to all email addresses, we know that everybody is getting it.
Yeah.
So as we send out surveys, as we send out requests for participation, as we send out information, please take part in those surveys and those requests for participation. We recognize right now that we're on the shoulder, hopefully we're on the shoulder, of the fire year going into the fall and winter months. And probably not too far along, we're going to be separating our temporary employees, regardless of whether they're administrative or uniformed. So we want to make sure that as quickly as possible, we can get this information out so we can make sure that we're getting their voices heard as well for employees who may separate in the next month or two.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Chief. Appreciate that. I think that is wonderful. We are all excited about what's going to be happening here for the future of CAL FIRE. And this document, this 2024 strategic plan, is really going to give everybody an idea of what's coming and what's happening and how to help us get there. So, Chief, thank you so much for your time today in talking about the new 2024 strategic plan that's going to be implemented in July. Any final words that you want to impart on the group before we bid adieu?
Yeah, no, I appreciate this discussion about the strategic plan. Again, it is so important moving forward. There are just a couple other things, not as part of the 5 points, but I just want to point out because of where we're at in October of 2023. Typically, October 2023 is our Cares Enough to Wear Pink campaign. And we are currently in that season, or this month in October of 2023. So take the opportunity through any of the number of vendors that came out in the executive message here just a few days ago to order your Cares Enough to Wear Pink apparel for the month of October of 2023. The proceeds are going to go to the Firefighter Cancer Support Network.
Yeah.
That really is about all forms of research and trying to find a cure for various types of cancers. So I'm wearing my shirt today, though I'm in a uniform shirt. Please take part if you so willing to as part of this great fundraiser.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. As I was coming up in the elevator earlier this morning, I saw someone with the patch, the pink patch on their uniform. It looked really, really good. I've seen the shirts. So yes, there is opportunity for everyone to get a hold of those and be a part of what we're celebrating and what we're supporting here for cancer awareness during the month of October. So thank you so much, Chief, for that reminder out to the folks. So appreciate that. All right, folks, another podcast in the books. This is Monty Manson, and we're going to be back with yet another podcast in the near future. So you can check us out on Spotify. You can check us out on YouTube. Anywhere you get your podcasts is where we'll be with another CAL FIRE Presents 5 Points with the Chief podcast. We're going to consider this episode cooked. We'll see you next time.